Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. I'm not sure if you can hear, but outside it is raining very heavily right now. We are having thunderstorms where I am, so that's fun. I love when that happens. So today I'm going to be giving my review of The Watchers. Now, I didn't really know much about The Watchers other than, of course, what everyone knows about this film, which is that it is directed by Ishana Night Shyamalan, who is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan. I only saw one trailer for this movie and it didn't particularly grab me, but I was interested to see what she was going to be doing with this property. So of course the question around this film is, does the apple fall far from the tree, right? How does Ishana's filmmaking compare to that of her father's? Are they similar in their authorship? This is her debut feature film, and in some ways I do feel like there are some unfair notions that people are having going into this film, right? Again, this idea that just because it has the Shyamalan name to it, people are going in having these preconceived notions about what the film is going to be or about her as a filmmaker, setting up certain expectations, and I think that's hard and I think that's a bit unfair as well. Now, I know there's plenty of people out there who are going to say like, there's nothing unfair about this. There are going to be people out there, I've already seen it on the internet, of people claiming that this is yet another example of Hollywood nepotism and that she has all of this immense privilege to be making this film that a lot of first-time filmmakers do not have. So I acknowledge that as well, and I think both things can be true at the same time. And yes, the fact of the matter is that her father is a well-known filmmaker. He did help produce this movie. She has acknowledged the privilege that she has in interviews talking about this film. Because of the name attached to it, of course, people are going to be coming into this with their own ideas of what they think this film could be about. It is unrealistic to think that they wouldn't. So all that being said, I tried not to bring in my own biases and feelings about M. Night's movies into The Watchers. So what is there to say about The Watchers? Honestly, not a lot. Okay, so I already feel bad because I have to be honest and say that I really did not enjoy this film a lot. I think it had a lot of problems, which I will get into. I'll also say off the bat here, like, I don't know if you can even categorize this film as a horror film. It does have a horror film elements to it, but by the third act, it's really leaning more heavily into fantasy and very much YA fantasy, right? If you don't know, this film is based off of a YA book of the same name. It's not even like Pan's Labyrinth type of fantasy where there are pretty heavy horror elements mixed within that. So for my hardcore horror fans out there, I would say skip this one. This is not one for you. Here's what I'll say, right? Here's what works really well about this movie. I thought on a technical level, the film is perfectly fine, right? There's a lot of very beautiful cinematography. Most of this film takes place in the forest, in the woods, and a lot of those shots looked very beautiful. And so I think Ishana does a really great job of being able to create these very whimsical, fantastical worlds. Where we have problems is really in the story and the characters. She did both write and direct this film. And look, as I said, this is her first film. She's only 24 years old, so she has plenty of time to keep working at her craft and get better and better with each film. I mean, look, as someone that is also a filmmaker, I was not making films of this caliber when I was 24, and yes, I certainly did not have the same resources that she does, but still, when you're that young of a filmmaker, like, you still have a lot of learning to do and a lot of growing to do and understanding what makes a good story. Yes, sometimes you can have your Orson Welles that makes Citizen Kane, but that really only happens once in a blue moon. So all of that to say, like, I'm not trying to be a hater here, and yes, this film definitely has positives. I think she does show a lot of potential, but there's still some learning and growing to do, and I think that's totally fine. Again, she's 24 years old. So yes, on a technical level, it is well made, although I did think there were some sloppy filmmaking choices in the third act, which I'll get into later. But yeah, the characters and the story of this thing was honestly just bad. Extremely bland characters. I mean, I can't really decipher one character from another. They all kind of feel the same. There's no real, like, distinct personalities amongst them. I don't know what these characters' wants are or what their needs are or what lessons they're supposed to be learning by the end of this thing. They all talk in, like, the same, like, monotone way. It's like Dakota Fanning, like, she goes into the woods, and she meets up with this group of people that are like staying in this like random house, and she's learning about the Watchers, and it's like the other characters are like explaining to her what the Watchers are, and they're all just, again, like talking in this very dull way of like, oh, the Watchers, they're these creatures that come and look at us at night. And then you have another character that's like, yes, they come and watch us at night. We must stand by the window. And it's just this like droning on dialogue. And, you know, maybe if that was connected to the Watchers and whatever power they have over these people, that would be one thing. But it does not seem like that is the case. Like, it's just kind of bad writing. It also doesn't help that all of the actors in this film feel like they are sleepwalking through their performances. I mean, it was fun to see Dakota Fanning in a movie. Again, I haven't seen her in something since, I don't know, War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise all the way back in the mid-2000s. But she is just like giving nothing in this movie. I don't really understand her character, and again, that is the fault of the writing, except for the fact that she is a character that went through a traumatic event. There was a trauma that happened in her family, and that's affected her throughout the years. But she's an American working in Ireland at a pet shop for reasons. And then there's like a whole segment with her at the beginning of the film where like she does this thing where she'll put on a wig and go out to bars and talk to men and create this whole like different persona from herself. And again, she's doing that for reasons. I don't know. They don't actually really get into it except just to say like, oh, well, this person has trauma, so they're acting weird. Like that never comes back again. Like it's only that one scene in the beginning and then it has nothing to do with the rest of the film. Why was that even in there? So yeah, she works at a pet shop and then her boss is like, hey, I have this parrot and I have a customer that bought the parrot and this person is like a few miles away, so I need you to drive the parrot over there. And it's like, well, who is this person? Like, why do they want this bird? Again, there are reasons why things are happening. We just don't know what they are. The film doesn't take time to explain them. So that's how she gets into the woods to begin with. And yeah, Dakota Fanning is just like giving us nothing, like just such a nothing of a performance. She's in the woods with her bird and she's clearly lost and her car is broken down and there's no one around to help her. And there's just a scene with her sitting in the forest with her bird. She's like talking to her bird and she's like, well, I guess if we're gonna die here, then I should give you a name.
We're gonna die here together. You might as well have a name.
It's like, you're stuck in the middle of the woods. Wouldn't you be a little bit more like freaked out or showing more emotion? I get her character is supposed to be a little bit aloof, but I feel like there's a difference between a performer acting aloof and then just not caring, because none of her reactions to anything felt real. There's this whole thing where she finds the other people and they're telling her all about like the Watchers. And again, it's just like blank face, like no expression, no emotion, no like confusion or being frightened or like anything. She's just like blank face and it's just like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know what kind of reaction that is. Like, she seems so bored throughout this whole movie. And the problem with that is that she's our protagonist. So if she's acting bored and doesn't care, that means that me as the viewer, I am also bored and I also don't care. There are other actors in this movie that we've seen in previous horror films. You have Georgina Campbell, who is also giving a pretty lifeless performance, but she was in Barbarian a few years ago and I thought she was great in Barbarian. I actually think she's one of the best things about that movie. She had so much more life and so much more expression. It did a really great job of oscillating between like having very funny lines but also acting scared. So she was great in that movie. This film, The Watchers, gave her nothing to do. And then they tried to like do this really awkward like romance storyline between her and one of the male characters, and like there's just nothing about it that feels realistic. So yeah, she's another one that just is like standing there and delivering lines but giving like no emotion to it or really reacting to the situation that she's in. You also have the older, wiser female character, right? She's like a history professor. I have to look up this actress's name because I keep forgetting. I know she's a French actress, Olwen, I think is how you say her first name. She has a very French sounding last name that I'm gonna butcher, so I'm not gonna even try that. So she was just in that god-awful Tarot movie that came out in the beginning of May, playing once again the, you know, older, wiser female character. Essentially, she keeps getting typecasted in these like archetypal old wise woman roles, which I get because she has a really great look to her. Like, I think if she was given better material, she could really shine in a film. She also played the older Sally especially in that weird Texas Chainsaw remake, reboot, requel that Netflix put out a couple of years ago that I keep forgetting exists. And again, her role is to just come in and basically give exposition dialogue to explain what is happening in this world. So yeah, the acting in this film is not great. And the thing is, as I was just saying with people like Georgia Campbell, like we've seen these people in other films before and they've given us good performances. Dakota Fanning has been in a ton of movies and has given us way better performances. She was acting way better than she is in this movie when she was only 12. So these actors can give good performances, they just didn't do it here. And again, like, I'm sorry to say, but that is a directing thing. I think it's a writing thing as well, because I don't think the script gave them anything to work with. Yeah, just not good characters. I didn't care about any of them, and so that made this film really difficult to sit through. There's also like weird things going on with what the theme of this movie is, or like just what direction they even want to take this movie. It starts off, it seems like the film is going to be some kind of commentary on, like, I guess our very voyeuristic culture, you could call it that, right? Again, this whole idea of like the Watchers, and they like to come at night and watch the humans. That's like their form of entertainment, is watching how other people live or their behaviors. Even like the big window that the Watchers see the human characters through. When you look at it, even the window looks like, you know, a large like theater screen. There's also a thing like the human characters, when they're inside this structure at night, they do have a TV there, and they do have DVDs of reality television shows, again, for reasons that are not explained. So you have the human characters watching this like reality TV show as they're being watched by the Watchers. And so I was like, okay, it seems like we're gonna get some sort of commentary on this, again, voyeuristic culture that we have. We are a society that is obsessed with watching people through rectangular screens, whether that's on social media or whether that is reality TV. So it seemed like the film was going there, and so I was in the theater thinking like, okay, maybe the twist is going to be they like break the fourth wall and actually address us as the audience watching what is happening on the screen. Because again, it has the Shyamalan name to it, so everyone went into this movie expecting there to be a big twist. So I was like, okay, that's like an interesting theme to play on, especially within a folk horror or at least folk fantasy story. But then by the third act, that's like completely forgotten about. And it definitely becomes more of this like hokey fantasy story with like fairies and changelings and weird humanoid creatures, like some sort of Attack on Titan knockoff. That's what the film becomes about. It becomes about these like creatures and the fantasy element of it, and very much going into like the whole fairy tale vibes, and whatever interesting themes they were building up around like voyeurism and watching, and this culture of us watching the lives of others mediated through screens. Like, that was gone. That never came up again once the second act really started rolling. So again, I'm not sure what the overall like message of this movie is supposed to be. I know I harp on this all the time on my channel about films not having like good themes or ideas of what they're trying to say. That's like the whole point of stories. That's like one of the main reasons why we tell stories. So when you have something and like it's presenting you with one thing, and then it completely drops that and goes in a different direction, it just feels very jarring. And again, it just feels like kind of sloppy writing, and like, okay, why were you spending so much time on this one thing in the first act, only to go a completely different direction by the third act? And again, it's not like a, you know, intentional switching around. Like, again, we just mentioned Barbarian. Barbarian is a film that starts off one way and ends another way, but it is very intentional in why it is doing that. This film, not so much. This film just feels like it gets really messy somewhere in the second act. And it feels like they were like, okay, we don't know like how to create a strong through line from this thing that we set up at the beginning of the film. So let's just try this other thing and hope no one will notice. So yeah, I was really not into the fantasy direction that this film decided to take at the end. You know, another big reason for that was just the creatures themselves. Like, they were obviously very like CGI creations. There's a lot of CGI in this movie. And I've said it before on this channel, but I am just someone that is not into creatures. To me, for some reason, they all look the same. It's always this gangly looking thing that feels like a ripoff of like Cloverfield or A Quiet Place. So yeah, I'm just not into creatures. I wasn't into these creatures. I wasn't really into the design of them. I didn't find them scary. And again, the twist that they decide to do with these creatures, like, well, one, I feel like we've kind of seen it before and what they do with the creatures. So everyone's expecting there to be a big twist in this movie, and like, yes, there is a twist, sort of. I mean, it feels like a twist that's like dragged out for 20 minutes, which I don't really think was necessary. And honestly, like, once it happens, it's basically a thing where you learn the truth about a certain character. And again, when you discover what that truth is, like, it's not that surprising. It's kind of one of those things where you see coming, or you highly suspect that that's what's going to happen, and then it does. And it's just like an awkward thing where it's like the person doing the revealing, right? They reveal what it is. They say to this other person, like, hey, you are this. And then the response from that other character is to just be like, well, I hope you're right. And then they just leave. And then the film like ends. It's not really that big of a twist. And again, it's kind of one of those things where, okay, you're revealing this information about this character, but A, what does that have to do with like the rest of the story, right? Again, what is your theme here? What are you trying to say? And then B, how is that information like impacting that character? It's a character that you spend a lot of time with throughout the movie. So for them to just kind of have this like non-reaction is a bit strange. Like, it just doesn't feel like there's a proper resolution to this movie. All of the characters are the same at the end as they were at the beginning, and just as deadpan and boring even after going through this very bizarre experience. I'll also say, like, I think another detriment to this film is that there were like weird pacing issues throughout the whole thing. Like, sometimes the editing just felt really off. For example, there were scenes that felt like they went by way too quickly. Like the scene where Dakota Fanning, when she first stumbles upon the people in this like structure and discovers the Watchers. She discovers them at night as the Watchers are approaching to look at everyone through the window. So you have all these characters coming in and being like, oh, they're coming, the Watchers, just stand by the window, like, just let them see you, blah, 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 all this stuff. And all that happens, like, very quickly, and then it's, like, in the next scene, Dakota Fanning is just already, like, assimilated into this, like, world. But it felt like all that happened, like, way too fast. Like, I can understand, you know, if she's coming into a scenario where the Watchers are approaching and everyone's kind of freaking out and is like, okay, just, like, stand here. I understand why you would want to have quick pacing in that moment. But then it felt like there needed to be a moment where they like slow down. And again, she kind of understands what type of situation that she's in, has a chance to react to that. I mean, again, there's like no reaction from this character. It's just like, you are now in this very bizarre world. And she just accepts it willingly and is like, yep, this is my life now. And again, it just feels like unrealistic. And I think maybe if they had slowed down that part a little bit and allowed her to react, not that she was really reacting to anything in this movie, but it felt like if she was going to react to something, that would have been the moment to do it. And then there are other times where it feels like the film is just like dragging on. You mostly feel this within like the second act, and it just feels like it's going so slow. And it's like, can we just pick up the pace a little bit? I have to be honest, I was looking at my phone throughout a good chunk of this movie, just calculating like how much time I had left to have to sit there and watch it. And I know I feel bad saying that, but this is just me being honest. And then there was like the ending where it's like this battle between two of these characters, and you have like Dakota Fanning and her character is like crawling on the floor trying to escape this creature, and she's like saying things to the creature, but like her mouth's not moving. Like you hear what she's saying, but it's very clear that she's actually not talking in that moment. It's just something that they like threw in there in the edit. And I was like, that is such sloppy filmmaking. Like moments like that actually made me really disappointed to see, because I expect that level of sloppiness from like a Blumhouse movie. It feels like they kind of gave up in the last moments of the third act. There's also weird choices being made in terms of like, I guess how they're choosing to tell the narrative, or like the narrative framing, maybe you could call it. And what I mean by that is like, you'll have the first act, it's pretty much playing out, you know, normally you see Dakota Fanning and her character going about their business, you have everything unfolding with the Watchers and learning what they're all about. And then the second act hits, and then suddenly we have voiceover from Dakota Fanning's character explaining to us that it is now winter time and they are all like suffering and trying to find food. So you have like voiceover there, and then you never have the voiceover again. I think maybe you have it very quickly at the end of the film. But again, this is another thing that just feels very like jarring. Like when you're choosing a narrative like framing device to tell a story, yes, you can go the traditional route, which is usually just having the film playing out. You're using visual cues to let the audience know what's going on and help them understand how the story is progressing interesting. Or you could choose to have a voiceover, right? Where you can have a character coming in and helping to explain what's happening, right? Helping to explain, their inner thoughts as well. This can be really effective, especially if you have a sort of like anti-hero type character, right? Or an unreliable narrator. That can be a really fun device to use in your storytelling. But you kind of gotta pick one or the other, like just having a film play out normally and then trying to bring in voiceover to explain what's happening in the middle of the second act, but then not have it anywhere else in the film. Like, again, this is one of those moments where it just feels jarring and it feels like sloppy storytelling. And the thing is that I don't think they needed voiceover in that moment. I think they could have just let the scenes play out and we as an audience would have understood what was happening. Because again, visually, you can show a passing of time between the forest and having it very lush and green versus in wintertime when it's barren and it looks cold and there's like snow on the ground. Like, that's a visual cue. We get it. We don't need a voiceover coming in and explaining to us like, now it is wintertime. I think another problem too, I sound like such a hater in this review. Another thing that this film does is it does what a lot of these kind of mediocre horror films that we've been seeing this year, this kind of trend of like, okay, let me take this like scary or creepy thing that happened in this other movie and then I'm gonna recreate it in mine, and because it was scary in this other movie, it's gonna be scary in my movie too. No, that does not happen. And the reason why that doesn't happen and the reason why it doesn't work is because usually when you're making a decision about scares or how a monster is gonna look or how the protagonist and the antagonist, how they're gonna meet up, like whatever decision you make, whatever horror trope you decide to use, or whatever camera angle you decide to use, or whatever editing technique or whatever it is, like whatever technique you are choosing to tell the story, ideally that will connect in some way back to, again, whatever your theme is or something to do with the characters, right? The type of scares that you use and how you frame those scares is going to be dependent on the kind of film and the kind of story that you're telling. The reason why certain things seem horrifying or effective in like the classic horror films is because those moments were crafted specifically for the story that was being created. It's not enough to say like, okay, I'm going to copy and paste this into my story and it's going to have the same impact. Like, there needs to be a reason why you're using a certain trope or a certain technique. And so I feel like this film was another one where it just wanted to kind of bring in a bunch of like elements that it saw in other horror films, put it onto a big pot and hope something good came out of it. So overall, like, it's just really hard for me to recommend this movie, at least like not seeing it in the theaters. And I always feel guilty saying that as someone that works at a movie theater. The problem is going to the movies is really expensive and it's a lot of time. And so it's also really hard for me to recommend a film that I just don't think is that great. I'm sorry. I would say, like, if you're interested, maybe wait for it to come on streaming and watch it. It's a film you could have on in the background as you're doing other things. I will also say, as a general rule, I'm not the biggest M. Night Shyamalan fan. If you are into his work, then you might enjoy this more than I did because, again, there's definitely his flavor sprinkled throughout this movie. There was a family sitting in front of me in the theater. It was like a dad with his daughter and the mom, or I'm assuming it was the mom. And you could tell that they had dragged him to go see this movie because the entire time he kept leaning over to them and like complaining about the story and like checking his watch to see how much more time was left. And it was like every time he leaned over to them to complain about something, they were just like telling him to shut up. But I was just sitting in back of him being like, yeah, man, I get it. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about The Watchers. Again, I'm sorry for being such a hater. I wish Ishana nothing but the best for her future films. Again, I'm sure as she continues to work and grow in her craft, things will start falling into place. So yeah, that's all I have to say about The Watchers. Did you see this film? If so, let me know your comments down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.